but we would be remiss if we did not start this podcast talking about the life of Pro Football Hall of Famer Jim Brown. Passed away late last week at the age of 87. You have been writing many books about football. You wrote Football Done Right, which comes out later on this fall in September. And I know there's a chapter in there about Jim Brown, and there's a section in there about one of the greatest football players we ever saw there. I never saw him, obviously, being younger and stuff. I saw YouTube highlights and highlights on TV and stuff. Yeah. But how will you remember Jim Brown, the running back for the Cleveland Browns, who passed away just last week?
Well, I think a lot of it starts with being in Cleveland in '87. My first year at the Browns, there was no Jim Brown. There wasn't really a mention of Jim Brown. And then when Belichick came in '91, we took a turn to understanding the past history of the team. And he really spent a lot of time bringing Jim Brown back into the organization because Belichick is a big believer in creating an environment about the past. I think we lose sight of this a little bit in today's team building. And I'm going to talk about it later as we go forward with this. But part of this is understanding your past allows you to handle your present. I wrote about this in Daily Coach today. But I think that's what Belichick. So when we reached out to Jim and you met him and then you sat and had time and talked to him, he was a very, very interesting man who was deeper than just football. And then as I wrote this book and studied his career and went back and revisited the '57 draft to understand how this incredible, talented man could be the 6th pick overall. And then you look at the 5 guys that were picked in front of him. 2 of them were halfbacks, Paul Hornung being the number 1 pick in that draft. It's interesting, Femi. That draft was done. 4 rounds were done in November of '57 at the Bellevue Stratford or the Waldorf, and then the next 26 were done in January at the Bellevue. So they kind of split it up. And, after Brown went, Jim Parker, another Hall of Famer, went after. So there was a lot of Hall of Famers in that draft in every single round. Sonny Jurgensen went in the 4th round. You go, Henry Jordan went in the 5th round. I mean, there were guys going later that obviously made. But Jim, when I saw that he was a fullback, I went and really spent a lot of time trying to understand, why they called him a fullback and he wasn't a running back. And, it was just incredible to watch him play pro football against guys that, he was probably bigger than. Started 118 games, didn't miss a game. Scored 106 touchdowns in 118 games. Averaged over 5 yards a carry. I mean, when you stand next to him, you're just and this is before he was older, you're just in awe of his physical specimen in terms of as it relates to the game that he played.
Yeah, and we were talking about it on the Lombardi line this past week, and you said that he was bigger than some of the offensive linemen who were blocking for him.
Yeah,
no question. That's remarkable to even think about that in today's game where every lineman is bigger than every single running back, but just he was ahead of his time at the position, because we always kind of have the debates of, would this player translate to this era? Would this player translate to that era? Jim Brown would translate to any era in terms of playing the position there, because, he was big, he was strong, he was fast, and obviously ahead of his time and dominant. I think some of the stats that kind of stood out to me when I saw people kind of remembering Jim Brown and putting out some of the factoids was that he's the only non-quarterback to win MVP 3 times. He also led the league in rushing 8 of those 9 seasons that he played, which still is the record till this day. 8 rushing titles. Nobody has ever touched it. I'm not sure anybody will, the way that the game is going now, but it's pretty remarkable, man, that some of the stuff that he's put on the football field on that resume.
Well, the first 4 years of his career, he only played 12 games. There was a 12-game season. And then the next 5 years, he went 14. And yet he carried the ball 289 times in his last season. And that was off of a 280 carry season the year before, 291 the year before. There was no load management for Jim Brown. Never ran out of bounds, always punished the tackler who tried to get to him. So, it was really an incredible display. And, this is a world-class lacrosse player. So he had incredible eye-hand coordination. I talk about running backs having above a 9 average in terms of pass completions. Jim Brown averaged 9.5 yards per pass attempt. Think about that. He was unbelievable even when they weren't throwing the ball to the halfback. he averaged 9 yards a catch. I mean, the guy just changed the dynamics of the game. And, you know, when you sit and talk to him about the game, he was more he understood the complexity of the game, and he was such a deep thinker. We were on a trip one time. I wrote about this in the book, in one of the little excerpts of the book. I tried to put it in a tweet, but I couldn't get it going. I tried to do it in a thread. I don't know what the hell happened. My computer skills are waning as I get older. But, you know, we were driving. Belichick and I were in Philadelphia. We were on a recruiting visit, and we went over to Camden, and there was a prison right on the Ben Franklin River, right on the river right there across the Ben Franklin Bridge, the Delaware River, and we went in there, and Jim was doing his Amera I Can program, which he put a lot of time and effort in. And so when we walked into the prison, you know, before we walked into prison, he goes to me, Lombardi, because he never said my first name, but I was honored that he actually knew my last name, you know. And he just said, you know, there's a no hostage rule in this prison, so if they take you, it's buyer beware, you know. So I was like, I gulped and said, oh my God. And, you know, he went out and gave a speech. Belichick gave a speech at the prison. We walked out of there. I was left like, you know, no big deal. And then 1994, we played in San Diego. We played in Los Angeles. And we were at the Super Bowl in Los Angeles. And Bill and I and our wives went up to Jim's house. And in the home, we walked into the house. He had Cribs and Bloods, and he was negotiating between the two parties to try to bring peace amongst them. So he really was deeper than just carrying the football. He was a very he was an activist. We saw that, you know. Bill Russell, the same thing, and he was a spokesman. I mean, he was really, and when Modell tried to strong arm him, Modell didn't really understand who Jim Brown was as a human being. You're not going to strong arm Jim Brown. Jim Brown's a man of his own conviction.
Yeah, you mentioned activist part. There's that iconic photo from the Cleveland Summit where it's Jim Brown, Muhammad Ali, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Bill Russell, and it's kind of like talking about social activism and fighting for civil rights, and like you mentioned, like just more than a football player, he was an activist. He also ended up becoming an actor. It's crazy. Just earlier this past week, I was watching one of my favorite movies, the Spike Lee movie, He Got Game, and Jim Brown is in that movie. And he's also in other movies, you know. It's like Any Given Sunday, he plays one of the coaches in that movie. So like he had an acting career, as well as obviously the football career, and as an activist as well. But I mean, he also, I think, as human beings, like nobody is perfect, and I think he has a complicated legacy, because when you look at Jim Brown and you read his Wikipedia page, there is a section of that Wikipedia page that says arrests and allegations, and there is a lengthy history of domestic abuse, and goes on decades of abuse. And it goes to show you that, like, as humans, obviously nobody's ever perfect. That's not to excuse what he did, because those are some serious allegations, and nobody would ever gloss over that. But I think it also adds to how complicated of a human he was, and how complicated his legacy is, and to talk about him now post-life.
Right. I don't think you could separate it. You know, one of the things I wrote about for the Daily Coach is this thing called Mbute. It's actually on the gravestone of Jackie Robinson. And basically it says a life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives. That's on Jackie Robinson's gravestone. And it was the symbol for the South African team that had gone through racial segregation, the cricket team down there. And the flower that they put on their chest, the portis is what they call it, that was the symbol, and that line was, and Jackie Robinson obviously borrowed that from this African tribe, as was their mantra. And so what it teaches us is, if we don't recognize our past, if we don't understand who we are, and accept the problems that we've had, as horrible as they are, and certainly domestic violence is, then we can't really put an accurate description on what we do. Ford Motor Company did this incredible video, and I posted it in the thing, about how they tried to really come back to Mbute, where it was they went back to recognize the mistakes that they've made in what they were doing in terms of building cars and their culture within their organization, and they brought that back for the forefront. I think sometimes when you skim over the bad, you paint a picture that's inaccurate, and it becomes inauthentic. And I think for Jim Brown, you have to mention the off the field stuff. You have to say how bad it was, and you have to understand that. But you also have to understand what he tried to accomplish. And it doesn't make any of that right, but I think it paints the entire picture of what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a fair way to put it, because like you said, like you can't mention him and all that stuff and then just gloss over something that happened, because like was not just like a one-off or anything like that. Like there was a number of different incidents that occurred with Jim Brown and women, whether it was his wives or other women involved there. So I think definitely mentioning it is part of the complete picture, as it is like with any person. Like it doesn't have to be line one and all that. And I think now, as like I've kind of reflected on it over the last handful of days, it's like, yeah, like that's something that was a part of his life, and we'd be remiss if we didn't bring that up as well there. I know you wrote about him in the book. Ultimately, how do you think Jim Brown's legacy will be remembered as a football player and just as a person as a whole?
Well, I think you have to separate the two, right? There's the bad that you can't really justify. Yeah. But I think what he tried to do in his later life, he tried to bring people together, and he tried to enhance other people's lives, whether it was the Bloods or the Cribs, whether it was, the America ICANN program. He was trying to bridge United. My favorite story is we're on the field before the Monday night game against Buffalo. And he comes over to me and says, Lombardi, tomorrow is going to be a great day for race relations in this country. And I said, why is that, Jim? He said, because they're going to convict O.J. Simpson. It never happened.
Yeah, never happened. That's certainly a hell of a story. We remember the life of Jim Brown here on the GM Shuffle.